Well, joining me now in the studio is Syrian American activist Rania Kisar, who's with the Syrian Humanitarian Institute for National Empowerment. Alongside her is international relations professor Ahmet Kasim Han, who's at Altinbas University. In London, we have journalist and Syrian analyst Makki, and in Moscow, Yury Barmin, a Middle East analyst with the Russian International Affairs Council. I thank you all for joining us here on The Newsmakers. Rania, good to have you here in studio, in person. The last time we spoke, you were in Idlib.
Yes.
What's it like? Tell me.
It's a humanitarian catastrophe right now. The poverty rate has risen up to, I want to say, more than 30%. The average income of human beings in Syria is not more than $100 to $120, while the average costs of living expenses exceeds $250. So we are reaching high levels of poverty. Crime rate is becoming very high. There's a lot of crimes taking place in Idlib and around Idlib. And the situation, as far as people are concerned, we're still very scared of the Russians. We don't trust them. We saw what they did in the south. We saw how they made amends, or they tried to make amends with the Syrian people in the south. And then just 2 days ago, 120 people got wrongfully arrested. And this is in Daraa.
In the context of the war, people will say, well, a bloodbath was averted. So while there might be big problems, obviously, it's not perfect. The ceasefire has held and things are relatively okay. Would you accept that?
Relatively okay for now. Like I said, the Syrian people do not trust the Russians, nor do they trust the Iranians. We do trust the Turkish government. We believe that if they say we will be protected, then we will be protected. But that doesn't mean that everybody knows that, because you have to remember something. The Syrian people, they don't have TV, and we don't have electricity all the time. So we don't get to watch the news a lot. And we just know that Russia might hit us anytime. It depends on what America says. That's what they say.
Makki, as another Syrian on this panel, would you agree with what Rania is saying?
I mean, I probably would to an extent, but I would fail to see where 23 million Syrians, how all of them trust the Turkish government. You've got to remember how polarized this conflict is. You have Syrians who have been supporting the government, you've got Syrians who are supporting the opposition, Syrians who are in the middle. So there is a number of different segments. So it's unfair to say that all of them don't have TV. In fact, lots of them do have TV and lots of them do follow the news. It's difficult because you've got this situation in Idlib where you have potentially 3 million Syrians, and it is almost a different reality from what's happening in different parts of the country. So it is difficult to balance that out. But I would definitely say that Idlib is one of the worst areas in Syria at the moment for services and for poverty. And the fact that the longer this de-escalation zone and this ceasefire continues, the better it will be for the humanitarian situation in Idlib. That goes without saying, absolutely.
Yury Barmin, how are the Russians looking at this, given that groups such as Hayat Tahrir Sham, HTS, have not left? They've not fully disarmed. Are the Russians thinking at some point we're going to have to go in and bombard this place again because this is not holding?
Sure. Well, of course, this is always continued to be an option B for Russia in Idlib. But for the time being, given the statements that are coming from the Kremlin today, one day after the kind of the deadline on the Idlib deal, Russians are saying that they are happy with the way Turkey is handling the demilitarized zone around Idlib. Of course, they're saying that there are lots of caveats here, but more or less the deal is holding, and Turkey managed to get the groups out of the demilitarized zone. Although, of course, I'm also a little skeptical here myself, because we know that the demilitarized zone area, including the groups like HTS in this area, most of them never even had heavy arms within what is today the demilitarized zone. They would normally deploy those arms before the fight and withdraw it later. So I'm seeing a lot of things that make me skeptical about this deal. But Russians are saying that the deal is holding.
Ahmet Kasim Han, if it gets to the point where Turkey cannot influence enough of these rebel groups to play their part, would they actually engage with them? For example, HTS, Al-Qaeda linked. Would Turkey actually fight them if they refuse to leave and they refuse to disarm?
Well, that's a question whose fate will be decided between a rock and a hard place, I have to say. If circumstances force Turkey to do so, it will. But I'm not sure if Turkey is going to search for the fight, if that's the word to be used. That is why I'm not really in a position to comment on the exact answer of that question. What I could say, though, is that if the situation dictates that, Turkey is not going to refrain from fighting with these groups. However, we also have to keep in mind that this, if it happens, inevitably calls in the cavalry in this case, being the Russians.
Rania, tell Yury Barmin why you, and I guess a big portion of the Syrian population in Idlib, why you don't trust the Russians. I don't expect Yury to be representative of all Russians, but I'd be interested to hear you tell him directly why you don't trust them.
Okay. Mr. Yury, it's because of what you guys did in Daraa. After the reconciliation process took place in Daraa, just about 5 days ago or 6 days ago, 120 people got arrested wrongfully for no reason at all. Even doctors, nurses, and the allegations that were made against them were completely false. Not only that, there's at least, I don't want to give a number here, but I want to say that thousands of people are now being displaced in South Daraa, and they have no place to go. And I'm sure you guys know about the catastrophe of Al-Rukman camp and how people there are dying on a daily basis because of malnutrition. When people from Daraa, when the military groups in Daraa sat down with the Russians and they discussed with them the peaceful reconciliation or the political process, they were promised things that they were never given. They were promised that they will not see the Syrian regime, and now the Syrian regime is inside Daraa. We were promised that it will be the Russian police forces that will be managing the area, yet that was never the case.
Yury, with all of that in mind, right, here's my question. Why does Russia bother? What's in it for Russia?
Well, look, if you allow me just 2 seconds to react to what was directed to me, I have no illusions as to whether, Syrians in Idlib trust Russia. I think, frankly, that is not even the problem, because the problem here is that the issue of Idlib was created by both Russia and Turkey and a bunch of other actors, including Iran, including the Syrian government. And that kind of cauldron of a mix of groups that is now in Idlib, Turkey did that, kind of readily assisted Russia transporting all those groups into Idlib. So I think all parties contribute to this problem, and all parties are trying to resolve this now. But also, I came from Damascus and areas around Damascus a few days ago, and I have to say, look, while Syrians in Idlib do not trust the Russians, Syrians in Damascus and in the government-controlled areas do not necessarily trust Turkey. So that is, of course, that is a chicken and egg problem, or a problem that you can characterize in whatever way you want. But the bottom line here is that at the end of the day, everybody needs to sit down and talk to each other, whether you trust each other or not. It is about the guarantees. It is about the rules of the game. And Russians and Turks are trying to establish those rules of the games that could be acceptable to all the parties. And that is a very slow and a very painful process sometimes.
Danny Makki, does Damascus feel as empowered as ever, given where we are in the conflict?
Well, I would have to say that this moment in the Syria crisis, it's probably the best that Assad and the Syrian government have been at in terms of strength, manpower, momentum. But that doesn't say that they make all of the rules and all of the shots. You've got countries like Russia and Iran who have a big say in how policies are made, especially in Idlib, where the Russians ultimately will have a final decision on whether an offensive takes place or not. So it's difficult to say that, Assad's managed to turn the tide of the Syrian conflict, but the Iranians and the Russians' role in this allows them to have a lot of say over what policies are made when it influences other countries such as Turkey or such as Lebanon or Israel or other states. So there is an element of agency here. And look, the Russians in Daraa, for example, as was stated by your guest, they never said that the Syrian army and the Syrian government won't enter. They just said that they would guarantee that this deal would happen. And if you look at Daraa in comparison to Aleppo, for example, it was a much, much cleaner offensive, to be honest. I mean, the civilian casualties were far, far less than any other area. So Daraa was actually, more of an example of Russia being a power broker than it was using brute force, such as in Aleppo and other areas. I think that if there was a situation which happened in Idlib closer to Daraa than Aleppo, I think the people of Idlib would have taken that without a second thought, because what we fear for Idlib and what the region fears, and especially Turkey, is an Aleppo-type scenario, which will have calamitous effects on both the humanitarian aspect and Turkey's role. But finally, we'd have to say that Russia really does respect Turkish interests in Idlib.
Right.
If it wasn't for respecting Turkey's role, it wouldn't have actually went on with this and said, we'll give you more time and we'll assess this. And they could have had an offensive 3 months ago. But we all understand that Turkey has a very important role and its national security is compromised in the Idlib situation. So taking that into account will mean that some sort of compromise and diplomatic agreement will have to be made on Idlib,
right,
whether it's now or whether it's in a month's time.
Rania, Daraa was cleaner than Aleppo, according to Danny. What do you think?
I'm sorry, Danny, that is not true. The catastrophes that have taken place in Daraa, when Daraa fell in the hands of the Russians and the regimes, were absolutely horrible. There are entire cities that are down to the streets, to the ground. Al-sham is down to the ground. They annihilated everybody, and so many people have had to go to the borders between Syria and Jordan, and then Jordan didn't let them in. So that's why they had to give in. Otherwise, they would not have given in to the Russians or to the Syrian regime. And as far as what your guest is saying about Russia respecting Turkish interest, I don't think that's true either, because Russia has several times broken the peace treaty before this last one and has shelled Idlib, has shelled Hama, even though there was agreement that there will be a ceasefire.
Although this is held so far, by and large, doesn't that show that the Russians have respected the deal that they signed with Turkey?
Perhaps, but they are saying that they want us to get the extremists out. And again, like I said to you before, there are families that have different members in different groups. So how are you, as a father or a mother, going to kick your son out?
It's hard to do, but it's still true that you can distinguish between, for example, the Free Syrian Army and HTS,
yes,
right?
you can, absolutely.
Right.
And it's not hard to distinguish between them by clothes, by ideology, by even the way they walk. It's not hard to distinguish them.
But would you accept that Hayat Tahrir Sham is a group that should not be a part of any solution in Syria?
I absolutely agree, and they should be, but not kicked out, because you can't kick someone out of their own nation.
So what do you do with them?
They have to be rehabilitated, and those that are not rehabilitated can go to jail. It's just as simple as that. You cannot hold millions of people accountable for a number of 15,000 members. You cannot make parents, families, children, women, and elderly pay for the mistakes of HTS.
Right. Ahmet Kasim Han, let me ask you, from the geopolitical perspective, what this says about Syria in 2018, given that if President Erdogan wants to decide something regarding Syria, whether it's protecting Turkey's national interest or trying anything to do with Syria, he's not talking to Bashar al-Assad, he's talking to Vladimir Putin and Hassan Rouhani. What does that say?
Well, yes, President Erdogan is not talking to Bashar al-Assad, but Turkey is talking to the Syrian regime. This has been insinuated by many government people responsible for at different positions for different issues, including ministers in the past, that Turkey has been insinuated to talk to.
But ultimately, the people who call the shots, are they the Russians and the Iranians, while Assad is just grateful for whatever he's going to get out of them?
No, I don't think so. He's an actor. He's not perhaps as independent as he would like to. But nevertheless, he has his own priorities. He has the ability to manipulate Iranians and Russians. Not, of course, manipulate in the sense that he could get them to do whatever his bid is every time he tries, but there is also a balance between the Iranians and the Russians in Syria, and he can't play the two against each other, and he does that from time to time. It is obvious. It can be seen from developments on the ground. And you can't really, in realistic terms, you can't really blame him for doing that. After all, that regime is after its survival. And for that survival, to guarantee that survival, it's going to do anything, and it will get into any kind of deal. Nevertheless, Turkey, if it sees that as a facilitator for the future peace in Syria, and as an opportunity that would save people from getting shelled, killed, families from being uprooted, it will definitely talk to the regime at some level. Even though maybe not officially. If it is not going to be at the presidential level, I don't think that this is going to happen. But Turkey did talk to the Syrian regime on the sides of Astana, on the sides of other conferences, and Turkey will continue to talk to the regime, knowing that this is a factor.
Danny Makki, the Foreign Minister Walid Muallim saying after Idlib, our target is east of the Euphrates, and that area must also return to Syrian sovereignty. Is he going to get what he wants?
I think they'll definitely look towards it. I'm not sure if he'll get what he wants in the long run, but that's definitely a very high priority on the Syrian government and on Russia's list, because, and I would even say that east of the Euphrates for Syria in the long term is possibly more important than Idlib, because Idlib is very complicated. It's something which there's a lot of factors, a lot of different groups, a lot of actors, a lot of interests, and it's a very ugly situation. But east of the Euphrates, I mean, I don't think that Assad, knowing the individual that he is and the history of the region, will allow the SDF to control such a large part of Syria in the long term. That's definitely going to be an objective that he, the Russians, the Iranians will have. And we've seen a heightened Iranian presence in eastern Syria just for that particular reason, to keep an eye on what the SDF is doing, on the US presence in Tenef. East of the Euphrates for Turkey, Assad, Russia and the Iranians is very high on the agenda, and I'm sure that this will be an issue for conflict well after the Idlib situation is agreed upon by the regional superpowers. But relating to how this fits in with Idlib, it's definitely monitor Idlib now and then focus on the east of the Euphrates after, as Walid al-Muallim said. And I would just like to remind you that around a month ago, and I'm sure that you know of this, the Idlib offensive was almost happening. There was wide-scale shelling, there was troop deployments, and then it stopped. It stopped primarily because the Russians did not want to create a big problem with Turkey. So it does reiterate my previous point that the Russians have taken into consideration Turkish interests and concerns and actually acted to prevent a full-scale catastrophe kind of happening at that time.
Okay, so
and now
let's ask Rania.
You'll find an agreement on it.
Right. So, Rania, for better or for worse, yes, your initial goals might have been Assad must go and the war must take a certain direction or the regime must fall, but would you have to accept some sort of compromise position brokered by Russia and Turkey and others? Would you accept something that's not ideal but stops the killing?
For right now, maybe. And I'm talking now on my own behalf because I know that a lot of people in Idlib will say no. They would rather continue, whether it's a war or a fight or just a revolution. You have to understand something. The revolution was never just a rifle. It's an ideology that grew and grew, wanting equality, wanting freedom, and wanting dignity. And there's no way, no political solution, no military solution, there's no way anybody is going to be able to take that from the Syrian people. They will continue, whether it's with the rifle or with the pen or with just a voice. I want to say something about Bashar al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad, like Dr. here said, yes, he's not just an actor, but he's an employee rather. He's an employee of the Russians, and he cannot make any decisions on his own until he's giving the permission. You can see him on television, how he's greeting the Russian president, and how right behind him is a military officer from the Russian regime, which is not protocol. Who should be greeting the president of Russia is the Syrian regime. Yet, who is always greeting him? It's the Russian regime. What we are seeing in Syria now is some sort of an occupation, I want to say. So the Russians now have taken over Damascus, Daraa, the south, and Turkey is now trying to protect Idlib from being demolished. And the East is for the Americans, and the West is for the Alawites, and the entire country is now in several pieces. But that doesn't mean.
I have to disagree with that.
But that doesn't mean by any chance. That doesn't mean by any chance. Allow me to continue. That the Syrian people will accept a halfway solution.
Okay. Danny wants to respond.
We will never accept halfway solutions.
Danny, come in and respond. We're out of time, but in under 30 seconds, if you can, please. Danny, go ahead.
Well, look, there is no Russian military presence in Damascus at all. The Russian military presence is strictly near the border areas and further towards Idlib. And the West is not entirely an Alawite population. There are Christians, there are Sunnis, there's Shia. There's all manner of people living in West Syria. It's not just an Alawite kind of statelet, as your guest is suggesting. Russia does not run Syria, but it has a lot of influence over what happens.
And you know what? The next time I invite Yury onto the program, I'd like to get into what's Russia's end game here. What's the thinking? What's their long-term goal? I think that's going to spin us off into another 10-minute discussion, and I don't have that time because I have to move on to another segment. But for the moment, I apologize if everybody didn't get an opportunity to say all that they wanted to say. But it was an interesting discussion. Rania Kisar, Makki, Ahmet Kasim Han, and Yury Barmin, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.